Hello, I'm Ollie and this is CriminOlly, where I talk about crime, pulp, horror, that kind of thing. Today it's all of the above. It's my monthly wrap up for November. Now, I think I did say in a previous video that I was going to stop doing monthly wrap ups because they take quite a long time to do. But when I was looking back at the books I'd read this month, the ones that were earlier in the months felt like so long ago that I figured it was worth doing and would be quite fun. But if you've been watching my weekly wrap-up videos, there will be a bit of repetition here, so apologies for that. Anyway, without further ado, let's get into the books. So, first up, crime. So, I read a number of... firstly, I read 21 books in total this month. 23 if you count the 20-Year Death, which is one of the books I read as 3 books, which you can do. So yes, I'll start with crime. So read a fair bit on my Kindle this month as well as paper books, so I will flash up images of the Kindle books I read when I talk about those. But yeah, getting into crime, and this is not in the order I read or in order of goodness, just in the random order that they're on my desk. So first up, I wasn't sure whether to put this one in crime or horror because it's kind of a bit of both. So Joyland by Stephen King. I thought I'd put it in crime because it says crime on the cover. So I really enjoyed this. It's King in full-on nostalgia mode, writing about a young guy in the 70s who's working at an amusement park where there's been a murder. And it's kind of about him and one of the girls who works at the park investigating the murder, but there's a supernatural element to it as well. It's quite heartwarming in places, it's really exciting in places, it does ramble a bit, but it rambles in that quite pleasant King way that's kind of a bit like getting a nice hug. So yeah, I really enjoyed it. It's kind of a cosy King book, I think I called it in my weekly wrap up. But yeah, good fun and, you know, worth reading if you want a smaller King book to read. Okay, next up, so yeah, that one I think I gave 4 stars. Next up, The 20-Year Death by Ariel S. Winter. So I did earlier in the month a head-to-head video where I talked about this and 5 Decembers by James Castrol. So I will try and remember to put a link to that either up there or up there. I can never remember which way around it goes. So this is an interesting book. So it's basically 3 books in one. 3 linked crime novels, each written in the style of a famous crime author. So there's one set in the 30s, I think. Yeah, set in the 30s, which is in the style of Georges Simenon. There's one set in the 40s, which is in the style of Raymond Chandler. And there's one set in the 50s, which is in the style of Jim Thompson. And it works better than you might expect it to. So the storyline that runs through those, there's kind of linkages between characters and things like that, and it actually all hangs together really nicely in the end and is quite a satisfying read. It's quite chunky. It's not, I don't know how many pages it was, 650 odd pages, but yeah, worth a read. I really enjoyed it. Yeah, so that was my next crime book, and then I read a few on my Kindle. So I read The Village of 8 Graves by Seiichi Yokomizo, which is a Japanese mystery novel, which I struggle with a little bit. So it's interesting, it's got a good concept. So it's about a guy who gets contacted out of the blue by some solicitors who tell him that he's inherited a bunch of money, and he goes back to the town where it turns out he was born, so he was adopted and doesn't really know any of this backstory. And his father was a guy who went nuts in the town and ended up killing a load of people. So it's about kind of the investigation to what happened back then. It feels like it's got a supernatural element to it at times, but it kind of doesn't. So there's almost a bit of horror creeping in there. It was quite an interesting read, but I found I think I was a bit tired when I read it, and I got a bit lost with all the characters and plot twists and things like that. So that ended up being a 3-star read for me. Also read on my Kindle A Deadly Shade of Gold, which is the 5th of the Travis McGee books by John D. MacDonald. It's a bit longer than the other, or the previous 4 Travis McGee books, and I felt like it was probably a bit longer than it needed to be. I think I gave that one 3 stars in the end as well. But that was quite good. So if you don't know him, Travis McGee is a a really cool kind of 50s, 60s detective who spends half his time kind of investigating cases and typically trying to get property and things like that back for people, and takes a cut of the, you know, of the value of the property when he solves the case, and spends the rest of his time living on a houseboat, just kind of bumming around and drinking and having relationships with various women. So he's a really cool character. As I say, the book went on a little bit. This one was about him, a friend of his from the past coming back and getting murdered, and an investigation into these kind of stolen golden artifacts from Cuba. So yeah, it was an interesting read. Some interesting stuff about the Cuban Revolution and things like that in there. But yeah, probably a little bit longer than it needed to be. But Travis McGee is always great fun to read. And then the last crime book I read was Get Carter by Ted Lewis. So this is a British crime novel from the early 70s. It was fantastic, really hard hitting, really gritty, famously filmed obviously with Michael Caine in the lead role of Jack Carter. But yeah, so this one's about a guy who is kind of a hard man who works in London but comes from the north of England, who goes back up north when his brother dies to investigate how his brother died, basically, and ends up getting his revenge on the people who are responsible. So yeah, fantastically enjoyable, really grim and gritty, as I say, but a brilliant book, and I gave that one 5 stars. So that's all the crime ones done. So what's up next? Pulp. Right, so lots of pulp. No Kindle pulp though, so we've got paperbacks for all of them. So let's go through those. So the first one, The Priest Kings of Gore by John Norman. So I think I'm going to do, so this is the third of the Gore novels. I think I'm going to do a video review of those 3 altogether. Oh, forgot to say, I did a video review of Get Carter. So again, I'll link to that. Yeah, I think I'm going to do a review of the first 3 Gore books together, because they actually work really well as a trilogy. So this is a series of books about a guy from Earth who gets transported to this other world called Gore, and goes on sort of lots of pulp fantasy type adventures there. So it kind of rips off the Barsoom John Carter novels by Bradbury. Which Bradbury is it? Ah, I forgot his name. That's terrible, isn't it? Is it even Bradbury? The guy who wrote the Tarzan books, anyway. Edgar Rice Burroughs, not Bradbury. Right, so yeah, kind of rips off the Barsoom books. What makes them different is that John Norman had some very dodgy ideas about the role of women, and Gore is a world where women are happily submissive to men. So the politics of these books are pretty appalling, and someone said in the comment on my short when I finished this one that they actually get worse as they go on. So I'll be interested to see. I've got a big stack of them behind me. I'll be interested to see what I feel about them as they go on. So far, the kind of balance between the misogyny and the entertainment of the pulp fantasy is keeping me going. You know, it's weighted a bit more to the enjoyment side. So I'm still enjoying them, but we'll see how long that lasts. But yeah, I think I can do a video review of the first 3 because they fit quite nicely together as a little trilogy. Next up, the first in the Survivalist books by Jerry Ahern, so Total War. So I really enjoyed this one. I might do a video review of this, I'm not sure yet. So this is, the series is a post-apocalyptic series about this guy, John Rourke, who is surviving in a post-apocalyptic American wasteland. The first book is mostly about the build up to the nuclear war, and it's actually done really quite well with you know, kind of, you see the American side, you see the Russian side, and Rourke kind of caught in the middle, trying to figure out what to do, trying to get back to his family. He ends up being in Canada, and he's trying to get back to his family before the nuclear Armageddon happens. But yeah, it was a lot better than I expected to be, and I really quite enjoyed it. Next up then, the second of the Phoenix Force books by Gar Wilson, Guerrilla Games. So this is a spin-off from the Executioner series. It was very silly, not very good, surprisingly little action in it, a lot less action than I expected. I can't even remember what it was about. I think it's about some people in South America, like Americans who are working in South America, who get taken hostage by some South American revolutionaries, and the Phoenix Force go over there and kick their asses. But yeah, as I say, it wasn't very good at all. Next, we've got 3 Executioner books. I'm going to do, I think, a video review on one of them, Assault on Soho, because it was so much fun. But this is books 4, 5 and 6 in the series. So Miami Massacre, whoops, Continental Contract, and then Assault on Soho. I really enjoyed all of these. So as I said in my previous videos, so the Executioner is a guy who's waging a one-man war against the mob. And in these ones, where are we? So Miami Massacre, he's in Miami. Again, interestingly, so after, what was the other one I talked about with Cuba in it? The Travis McGee book. So in this one, Mac Bolan, the Executioner, teams up with some Cuban emigres in Miami to take on the mob. So that was fun. It's got a fantastically exciting kind of waterborne ending. In Continental Contract, he ends up, it starts with him in a gunfight in an American airport, and he escapes by jumping on a plane to Europe, which seems like a slightly strange way to escape. But yeah, so it's then him travelling around France, taking out mafia guys in France. And it's got a fantastic like sub-character, or supporting character called, I can't remember her surname now, but Cici, who's a kind of French starlet who's just brilliantly entertaining. So that was good. And then this is the one I was really looking forward to because it's set in London. So Assault on Soho, so it's got some fantastic British accents in it. So everyone in it who's British is either really, really posh or a Cockney. And it's got a very strange sex club in it that Bolan ends up staying in. There's all sorts of weird stuff going on in this one, and it was really quite entertaining. So that's the 3 Executioner books I read. Next up is Edge, Vengeance is Black. So the Edge books are a 70s series of westerns, which are famed for being very brutal, about this character called Edge, whose real name is Josiah Hedges. And there's this kind of, every other book talks about his backstory as Josiah Hedges in the American Civil War, where he fought on the Union side. So this one is one of the ones that carries on that story, and has got Edge and his kind of troopers, who in the previous book were captured by the Confederates, who've managed to escape and have freed a load of slaves and are kind of trying to get back to Union lines with those slaves. So there was a racial aspect to it which felt like it could have been really dodgy, but actually I think wasn't too bad in the end, in terms of like the freed slaves going on a rampage and things like that. I think he just about managed to pull it around and make it not horribly racist, but it probably was a bit dodgy. But yeah, it was still quite an entertaining read. And then finally, and probably best of all, I finished reading this, which I think I'd started the previous month. So The Coming of Conan the Cimmerian, recommended by the fantastic Michael K. Vaughan. So this is the first of a 3-volume set of all of the Robert E. Howard penned Conan stories, and just a really entertaining book. The stories are all fantastic. It's beautifully illustrated. Got like fantastic illustrations like that. So yeah, thoroughly enjoyed it. I think I read it kind of in bits because it's short stories, so I didn't read it all in one go. But yeah, very, very solid read. Very much entertained. Very much enjoyed that, and will probably pick up some more of the Conan books when I'm off my 100 book challenge. I'm trying to think which book was the first book I read in the challenge out of these, and I can't remember. So I will, at the end of the video, I'll say. Right, so moving on to horror. So again, a few Kindle books in the horror bunch, and a few non-Kindle books. So let's do the non-Kindle books first. So Let's Go Play at the Addams by Mendel Johnson. So this was a reread for me. I first read this as a teenager. Again, I've done a video on this, a head-to-head video where I compare it to Jack Ketchum's The Girl Next Door. This is just such a impactful, disturbing book. I thought it was brilliant. So it's about a gang of kind of, I think it's 5 kids who kidnap the young woman who's been hired by the parents of 2 of the kids to babysit them or like watch them while the parents are away on holiday. So yeah, they kidnap this girl, tie her up, and inflict horrible torture and stuff like that on her. Yeah, really chilling, very effective. Enjoy is the wrong word, but I thought it was a very good book. And it's interestingly not that graphic, but still really, really horrible, just in terms of the scenarios and things like that. So that was excellent. Also read Queen of the Cicadas by V. Castro. So I've done a video review of this one. So this is a fascinating kind of horror novel that blends together kind of Mexican folklore and things like that. So it's about a woman who, so a middle-aged Mexican-American woman who returns to her home state to go to a wedding, and it turns out that the wedding's being held in a hotel that's built on a ranch where, you know, years ago, decades ago, this immigrant worker woman was killed, and she's come back and kind of haunts the place as this character, the Queen of the Cicadas. But yeah, beautifully tied together. Watch my full review of this if it sounds something that would interest you, but I'd definitely recommend it if you're a horror fan. And then other horror books, so these are all Kindle ones. So Funland by Richard Lehman, which again was a reread. So I thought this was okay. It's probably better written than a lot of Lehman's books, but also less fun because it's only right at the end that he really gets into the over-the-top horror stuff. So it's about a coastal community in California where the local kids are like waging a war against homeless people who live in this kind of amusement park, Funland. And yeah, it's quite offensive at times in that it feels like Lehman is quite supportive of these kids in their kind of abuse, basically, of the local homeless population. But yeah, it was okay. The end kind of pulled it back round again in terms of you know, ramping up the silly horror side of things again. Next one was The Resurrectionist by Ruff James White, which I read as part of the Played by Visions kind of buddy read along kind of thing, which was an extreme horror novel. It was definitely extreme and quite horrible. It wasn't terribly good. So it's about a guy who has the ability to bring people back to life, and when he does that, they lose their memory of what happened to them before they died, or just before they died, and he uses that power, rather than using it as a power for good, he uses it to rape and murder people. So yeah, and it's just insanely graphic at times, and Ruff James White isn't a great writer, but he's definitely got a very a very interesting imagination in terms of the horrible things that can be done to the human body. So yeah, not necessarily a book I recommend, but it did have its moments. Moving on then, so also read Swamp by Peter Tremaine. So this is a, I think, early 80s British horror novel about a giant creature stalking the Florida Everglades. It was fine. It was kind of, again, reasonably well plotted and kind of hung together quite well, but all the opportunities that Tremaine had to include sex and violence, which is what you want in an 80s British horror novel, in my opinion anyway, he completely failed to do that. So it was a bit of a letdown from that respect. It felt a bit tame, to be honest with you. So yeah, that was okay. So that's the horrors done. So now on to that kind of thing. So two of those. So first one is First Blood by David Morrell. So again, this was a reread. I read it absolutely years ago and didn't really remember it very well. Did a buddy read of this with Juan from Played by Visions, and I thought it was fantastic. So obviously, if you've seen the movie, you know, you pretty much know what happens, but there's some very key differences, and it just plays out really well. So Rambo, who's this Vietnam War veteran who's kind of hitchhiking across America, ends up going to this town where the sheriff doesn't like the look of him, basically doesn't want scruffy layabouts in his town, and the kind of conflict and battle between them escalates to all-out war. It was just incredibly gripping. The first third in particular, where the tension is gradually ramping up, was just beautifully done, and it's, yeah, by the end completely apocalyptic. So yeah, I thought that was fantastic. And then the other one was The Eye of the World by Robert Jordan, so the first of the Wheel of Time series. So appropriately enough, because Robert Jordan obviously wrote quite a few Conan novels, so tie back to the Conan book I read as well, although there's no real linkage between them other than the authors. But yeah, I enjoyed that. I gave that one 4 stars. So it's very long. It's like 800 pages, and it's, you know, in terms of the story that actually gets told in those 800 pages, it's longer than it needs to be. But it's got that immersive world building vibe that you get from a decent fantasy novel, and so I didn't really mind the fact it was so long. It's, you know, it takes you on a journey. It's like a lot of fantasy novels, you know, it's got that kind of quest type plot line, so there isn't really a plot, it's just people going from one place to another place and stuff happening to them along the way. But yeah, I enjoyed it, so I won't go into the details of it, because again, I think I'm going to do a video of that one where I compare it to the TV show that's on Amazon Prime now. But yeah, it was a very entertaining read. And I'm finishing off the month, so I'm actually filming this a bit late, so apologies, it's the 4th of December now. So I've actually finished this, Dead City, which is what I was reading at the end of the month, which is one of the most bleak and depressing books I've ever read. But I'll talk about that properly in my December wrap up, and I'm also definitely going to do a standalone video review of this one because it was so good. I just went to check on my 100 book challenge books, so I'm up to book 10 of those now, albeit the 10th book was Dead City, which I finished in December rather than November. And I also, when I was doing that, realised that I forgot to talk about a book completely, which was The Troop by Nick Cutter, which is another one I read in November. Again, I've done a video for that, a separate video, but that was again, I think I gave it 3 stars, so it's okay. So it's a horror novel about a scout troop who are on an uninhabited island with their scoutmaster, and a guy who's been infected with a horrible disease which causes people to be ravenously hungry, ends up on the island as well with them. So it's got some extremely horrible horror in it, which was, you know, entertaining in the way that horrible horror can be. But overall, I didn't think it was phenomenal. You know, it's an entertaining horror read, but no more than that. So anyway, in terms of the 9 books I read in November against my 100 book challenge, and if you haven't seen the 100 book challenge video, I'll link to that. But basically, I'm trying to read 100 books I already own before buying any new ones, with a few caveats. So the 100 books I read were A Deadly Shade of Gold, The Troop, The Village of 8 Graves, Get Carter, Swamp, The Eye of the World, Total War, the first survivalist book, Assault on Soho, Priest Kings of Gore. Priest Kings of Gore was the 9th one. So that's 9 books knocked off, 10 if you include Dead City, so 90 to go in the challenge. Right, so that is my November wrap up. Hope you enjoyed that. If you've read any of the books, do shout in the comments, we can have a chat about them. As always, hope you and your family and friends are keeping safe. Watch out for Omicron, which sounds like it's pretty nasty, so make sure you're jabbed, make sure you're wearing a mask and all that good stuff. Thanks for your time, and I will speak to you again soon. Cheerio.